The bitter cold of the freezer door seeped through Isla's thin blouse, a numbing shock that barely registered against the frantic, icy terror flooding her veins. Every hum of the compressor, every distant clang from the convenience store's back room, was a thunderclap in the suffocating silence of her hiding spot. She was wedged between the glass-fronted beverage cooler and a wire rack of potato chips, her body contorted into an impossibly small shape. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile, unforgiving glare on the linoleum floor, illuminating every speck of dust, every forgotten stain. Each one felt like an accusation, a detail that would give her away. Outside, the rhythmic squeak of the gas pump handle stopped. The heavy thud of a car door slamming shut followed, a sound more final and terrifying than a gunshot. His footsteps crunched on the gravel-strewn asphalt, slow, deliberate, predatory. Corbin. He was coming. She squeezed her eyes shut, a useless gesture, as if blocking out the light could make her invisible. Her breath hitched in her throat, a tiny, trapped bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. The small bell above the gas station door chimed, a cheerful, mocking sound that announced the arrival of her monster. He was inside. The world shrank to the space behind this humming metal box, the smell of stale beer and refrigerated sugar a cloying miasma. Just one wrong move, one shaky breath, and this desperate bid for freedom would end in a way she couldn't bear to imagine. "Can I help you?" the cashier asked, his voice a bored monotone. It was a young man, probably a college student, with tired eyes and an expression that said he'd seen it all. But he hadn't seen this. He couldn't possibly understand the life-or-death stakes playing out in his brightly lit, mundane little world. "Looking for my wife." Corbin's voice was a smooth, cultured baritone, the kind that charmed neighbors and disarmed suspicion. It was a voice that could speak of charity donations and community projects, a perfect veneer for the violent rage that simmered just beneath. To Isla, it was the sound of breaking glass and slammed doors, the sound of her own spirit cracking. Small woman, dark hair, wearing a blue blouse, got a little flustered, ran off without her purse. He made it sound so reasonable, like a simple domestic misunderstanding. A concerned husband looking for his scattered, emotional wife. He was an artist, and his canvas was deception. Isla pressed her cheek harder against the cold metal, praying for it to swallow her whole. The blue blouse. He was describing her perfectly. He knew she was here. This wasn't a search. It was a hunt, and he was savoring the final moments before the kill. She could hear his polished dress shoes tapping a patient rhythm on the floor, a sound that echoed the methodical way he had dismantled her life, piece by piece. First her friends, then her family, then her job, until he was the only person left in her universe. A cruel, lonely god of a world contained within the walls of their pristine, silent home. A large shadow fell over the aisle. A man built like a mountain covered in denim and leather blocked the fluorescent glare. He wore a heavy vest, adorned with patches she couldn't read from her position, the leather worn and cracked like ancient parchment. He moved with a heavy, unhurried grace, his boots making a solid, grounding sound on the floor, a stark contrast to Corbin's sharp, impatient tapping. He reached into the cooler, his arm a canvas of intricate, faded tattoos, and pulled out a bottle of water. For a moment, his eyes, deep-set and startlingly perceptive, seemed to flick toward her hiding place. It wasn't a direct look, more of a sweep, an instinctual assessment of the room. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. Had he seen her? Was he with Corbin? Panic, sharp and metallic, rose in her throat. The big man ambled toward the counter, placing the water bottle down with a soft thud. He didn't speak, just nodded at the cashier. He was waiting. Behind him, Corbin was growing more agitated. The patient tapping had stopped. "You're sure you haven't seen her?" He pressed the cashier. "She's not well." "I'm very worried." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. The cashier shrugged. "Sorry, man. Been a slow night. Just you and..." He gestured with his head toward the biker. From his pocket, the biker pulled out a worn leather wallet, his movements deliberate. He wasn't in a hurry. He seemed to be taking up space, creating a physical barrier between the counter and the rest of the store. He was observing, watching Corbin's reflection in the glass of the cigarette display. Isla saw it too. The mask of the charming, concerned husband was starting to slip. A muscle in Corbin's jaw was twitching, his eyes scanning the aisles with a predatory gleam that the cashier couldn't see. But the biker, Grizz, saw it all. He'd seen that look before. He'd seen it on pimps and dealers, and men who used their fists to feel powerful. It was the look of a predator whose prey had dared to escape the cage. Grizz paid for his water, his large, calloused fingers fumbling with the change just a little too long. He was buying time, but for what? He wasn't sure yet. His instincts, honed by years on the road and a life lived on the fringes, were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong in this sterile, 24-hour oasis of fluorescent light. The woman Corbin was describing and the raw panic he'd glimpsed in a flash of blue behind the chip rack didn't add up. One was a story, the other was the truth. As he turned to leave, he let his gaze drift over the store one last time. He saw the slight tremble of the chip bags on the rack. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of detail a man like Corbin, consumed by his own righteous fury, would miss. But Grizz didn't miss it. He pushed the door open, the cheerful bell chiming his exit, and stepped out into the cool night air. The moment he was clear of the door, his phone was in his hand, his thumb flying across the screen, sending a single, coded message to the man whose number was saved under one word, President. The message was simple. Roadside angel. Cage is rattling. Stand by. Inside, Isla heard the bell, and a sliver of hope died. The large, silent man was gone. She was alone again with the hunter. Corbin's patience finally snapped. I'm going to check the restroom, he announced, his voice tight with restrained fury. His footsteps moved toward the back of the store. This was her chance. Her only chance. It was a desperate, insane gamble. With a surge of adrenaline that made her limbs feel both heavy and weightless, she scrambled from her hiding place. Her legs, cramped and shaking, nearly gave out. She didn't dare look toward the back of the store. She just ran. She burst through the glass door, the bell shrieking her escape, and into the night. The air was cold on her tear-streaked face. For a heart-stopping second, she was free. But the parking lot was a wide, open space, a killing field illuminated by the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. His car, a sleek, black sedan that was as soulless as its owner, was parked right by the door. She veered away from it, her bare feet slapping against the cold, gritty pavement. She had no plan, no destination. There was only the running. Isla. His voice cracked through the night like a whip. The charm was gone, replaced by pure, uncut venom. You stupid bitch. You think you can run from me? She risked a glance over her shoulder. He was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He wasn't running after her. Not yet. He was enjoying this. He started walking toward his car, his movements calm, confident. He knew she had nowhere to go. This lonely stretch of highway was his kingdom. And then she heard it, a low, guttural rumble that started far away and grew steadily closer. It wasn't the sound of a single engine. It was a chorus, a deep, throbbing vibration that resonated in her bones, in the very pavement beneath her feet. Headlights, round and bright like the eyes of avenging angels, crested the hill. One pair, then two, then five, then a dozen. A rolling wave of chrome and steel and thunder. They weren't just passing by. They were slowing down, their engines downshifting into a symphony of controlled power. They turned into the gas station, their headlights sweeping across the scene, pinning Corbin in a brilliant, inescapable spotlight. The Hell's Angels had arrived. The lead bike, a custom Harley with ape hangers that reached toward the sky, pulled to a stop, cutting off Corbin's path to his car. The rider swung a leg over, his boots hitting the asphalt with an authoritative thud. He was taller than Grizz, leaner, with a presence that commanded the entire parking lot. The patch on his back was unmistakable. The death head, framed by the words that struck fear and respect into the hearts of men across the country. He was the president. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and regret. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter storm, locked onto Corbin. He didn't speak. He just watched. The other bikers fanned out, forming a silent, intimidating semicircle, their engines idling in a low, menacing growl. Grizz was among them, his face grim, and he gave the president a short, sharp nod. The message was clear. This was the man, and that was the woman. Rook, the club president, let the silence stretch. He let Corbin feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on him, the thrum of all that horsepower vibrating through his expensive shoes. He saw the flicker of panic in the abuser's eyes, quickly masked by arrogance. Men like Corbin were used to power, the kind that came from money and lawyers and whispered threats. They didn't understand this kind of power, the kind forged in loyalty, brotherhood, and a shared code that put protecting the vulnerable above all else. Rook's gaze shifted from Corbin to the trembling woman near the pumps. Isla. She was huddled against one of the concrete pillars, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning, unbelievable hope. She looked so fragile, a ghost in the harsh halogen lights. And in her, Rook saw another ghost, a memory he'd spent 2 decades trying to outrun. He saw his sister, Sarah. He saw the same haunted eyes, the same faded bruises she tried to hide with long sleeves. He saw the end result of his own failure to act, a memory that fueled the cold, righteous fire in his soul. He had been too late for Sarah. He would not be too late for this woman. Evening. Rook's voice was a low gravel, the sound of whiskey and road dust. Looks like you've lost something. He gestured with his chin toward Isla. Corbin drew himself up, puffing out his chest. The arrogance was a shield. This is a private matter. My wife is unwell. I'm taking her home. He took a step toward Isla, his hand outstretched as if to soothe a frightened animal. Before he could take a second step, Grizz moved. He wasn't fast, but he was immovable. He simply shifted his weight, placing his colossal frame directly in Corbin's path. I don't think she wants to go with you, Grizz said, his voice a rumbling bass. Corbin's face contorted in a sneer. And who the hell are you? Some grease-stained thug? Get out of my way before I call the police and have this whole pathetic circus arrested for harassment. A low chuckle went through the assembled bikers. The threat of police was laughable to them. Rook took a slow step forward, the chrome on his bike gleaming under the station lights. You can call whoever you want. But first, you're going to empty your pockets. Put your keys and your phone on the hood of your car. Slowly, it wasn't a request. The authority in his voice was absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. For a second, defiance warred with fear on Corbin's face. He looked from Rook's unblinking stare to the wall of leather-clad men surrounding him. He was a predator, but for the first time in his life, he was no longer at the top of the food chain. The pack had turned on him. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys and a sleek, expensive smartphone. He tossed them onto the hood of his black sedan with a clatter that sounded deafeningly loud in the tense silence. Rook nodded to one of his men, a wiry biker with a skull bandana tied around his head, known only as Socket. Socket scooped up the items. He tossed the phone to another brother, who immediately started scrolling through it, while Socket himself walked over to Isla. He didn't get too close, maintaining a respectful distance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We're here to help. Is this man your husband?" Isla could barely find her voice. She looked at the circle of bikers, these terrifying, mythic figures from the news and movies. They weren't looking at her with pity or judgment. They were looking at her with a fierce, protective focus. She looked at Rook, at the profound sadness and unyielding strength in his eyes. And for the first time in years, the suffocating blanket of fear began to recede, replaced by a tiny, flickering flame of courage. She nodded, a jerky, convulsive movement. "Yes," she whispered, her voice raw. "And do you want to go home with him?" Socket asked, his gaze steady. Tears streamed down her face, hot and cleansing. "No," she said, the word coming out stronger this time, filled with all the pain and defiance she had swallowed for so long. "Please don't let him take me." That was all Rook needed to hear. The finality in her voice sealed Corbin's fate. "You heard the lady," Rook said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "She's not going anywhere with you. Not tonight. Not ever again." He took another step closer, invading Corbin's personal space. The smell of road leather, gasoline, and raw power washed over the abuser, who involuntarily flinched back. "Men who put their hands on women, we have a special problem with that. It goes against our code." Corbin's bravado finally shattered, replaced by a primal fear. "You can't do this," he stammered. "I have rights. I have lawyers. I'll ruin you." Rook smiled, but it was a terrifying sight, devoid of all warmth. It was the baring of teeth. "Lawyers," he mused, as if tasting the word. "We've dealt with lawyers. They bleed just like everyone else. See, you operate in a world of paper and rules made by men in suits. We don't. Our world has one rule. You don't prey on the weak. You broke that rule." He looked back at Isla. "What he did to you, it ends now. That's a promise." This promise hung in the air, heavier and more solid than any legal document. It was a vow sealed in chrome and Brotherhood. While Rook held Corbin's attention, two other bikers moved with quiet efficiency. One retrieved a thick blanket from his saddlebag and gently draped it over Isla's shoulders, shielding her from the cold and the prying eyes of any passing cars. The other, the one with her phone, held it up. "President," he called out. "Got it. Texts, photos, recordings. It's all here." Corbin's face went pale, a sickly, greenish-white under the fluorescent lights. The digital leash he had kept on Isla, the evidence of his own monstrous behavior he'd thought was his ultimate tool of control, was now in the hands of his executioners. He had meticulously documented his own downfall. The dramatic irony was so thick, it was almost poetic. Rook's cold smile widened slightly. Well, it seems you're not just a monster. You're a stupid 1 inch." He turned his back on Corbin, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and walked toward Isla. He knelt, bringing himself down to her level, a gesture of respect that stunned her. His stormy gray eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a deep, aching empathy. "My name is Rook. You're safe now. We're going to take you somewhere he can never find you. Do you trust us?" Isla looked into his face, a roadmap of a hard-lived life. She saw the ghost of his own pain there, the source of his righteous fury. She had been running on pure instinct, but now, for the first time, she made a conscious choice. She chose this path, this unlikely, terrifying, and beautiful salvation. She gave a single, firm nod. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I trust you." Rook stood and turned back to his men. "Grizz, Socket, you're with me. Take the lady. We'll ride escort. The rest of you," he said, his gaze falling on the remaining bikers and the paralyzed form of Corbin, "convince Mr. High and Mighty here that leaving town is in his best interest. Be persuasive." A dark, collective grin spread across the faces of the remaining men. They began to slowly close the circle around Corbin, their shadows stretching long and menacing in the night. The sound of their engines revving in unison drowned out his pathetic protests. As Grizz gently helped Isla to her feet, she took one last look at the man who had been her tormentor. He looked small now, pathetic, stripped of his power and his tailored suit facade. He was just a bully who had finally run into a bigger, more righteous force. She felt no pity, only a vast, cavernous relief. She climbed onto the back of Rook's bike, her hands hesitating for a moment before gripping his leather vest. It was solid real, a shield. As the powerful engine roared to life beneath her, she leaned into the strength of the man in front of her, closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, felt the wind of freedom on her face. The convoy of Harleys pulled out of the gas station, a phalanx of steel and thunder, leaving the darkness and the monster behind them. They rode not into the sunset, but into the deep, star-filled night, carrying with them a single, rescued soul, their roaring engines a hymn of defiance and redemption. The ride was a surreal blur of wind, engine thunder, and the steady, solid presence of Rook in front of her. Isla kept her eyes shut, the cold night air a balm on her swollen face. Each mile they covered was a chain link broken, a step further from the gilded cage she had called home. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the roar of the engines couldn't communicate more profoundly. It was a language of power, of escape, of a promise being kept. They rode for what felt like hours, turning off the main highway onto winding country roads, the scent of pine and damp earth replacing the stench of gasoline and fear. Finally, the bike slowed, turning down a long gravel driveway shrouded by towering oak trees. A sprawling, rustic-looking clubhouse came into view, with warm light spilling from its windows. It wasn't a fortress, but it felt like the safest place on earth. The engines cut out one by one, and the sudden silence was almost as overwhelming as the noise had been. Grizz and Socket dismounted, their movements quiet and respectful. Rook waited until Isla felt ready, and when she finally released her grip on his vest, he swung his leg over and offered her a hand. His touch was firm, steady, and completely impersonal. It was the touch of a protector, not a predator. As he led her toward the clubhouse door, a woman emerged. She was older, with kind eyes, a no-nonsense expression, and graying hair tied back in a practical braid. She wore jeans and a faded band t-shirt, and she held a steaming mug in her hands. "This is Sadie," Rook said simply. "She runs this place, and everyone in it," he added with the ghost of a smile. "You'll be safe with her." Sadie's eyes took in Isla's bruised cheek, her torn blouse, her bare, dirty feet. There was no pity in her gaze, only a deep, knowing empathy. "Come on, honey," she said, her voice warm and gravelly like well-aged whiskey. "Let's get you cleaned up. The boys can handle the rest." She looped a comforting arm around Isla's shoulders and led her inside, away from the world of men and motorcycles, into a sanctuary of warmth and safety. The clubhouse interior was nothing like Isla had imagined. It was clean, filled with worn leather couches, a massive stone fireplace, and the smell of coffee and wood smoke. It felt less like a biker den and more like a well-loved home. Sadie led her to a small, private room in the back with a simple bed, a clean bathroom, and a window that looked out into the dark woods. "Shower's hot," Sadie said, pointing. "There are clean clothes on the bed. Mine might be a bit big, but they're soft. When you're ready, there's soup on the stove. Don't you worry about a thing tonight. Just breathe." She gave Isla's shoulder a gentle squeeze and then left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in the quiet room, the events of the night crashed down on Isla. She slid down the wall, her body racked with sobs. But these were different tears. They weren't tears of fear or pain, but of release. A tidal wave of grief for the woman she had been, for the years she had lost, and a torrent of overwhelming gratitude for the impossible rescue she had just experienced. She stayed there for a long time, letting it all pour out until she was empty and exhausted. Then, moving like an automaton, she stepped into the shower. The hot water felt like a baptism, washing away not just the grime of her escape, but the invisible filth of Corbin's touch, his words, his presence in her life. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, letting the steam fill her lungs, clearing the last vestiges of his suffocating control. Meanwhile, in the main room of the clubhouse, Rook stood before the fireplace, staring into the flames. The other bikers who had been at the gas station had returned, their faces grim but satisfied. There was no cheering, no celebration. This was not a victory to be celebrated. It was a duty that had been fulfilled. Grizz approached him, handing him a bottle of beer. "It's done," Grizz said quietly. "He understands the terms of his relocation. Permanently." Rook took a long pull from the bottle, the cold glass a small comfort in his hand. "Any trouble?" "He made some calls," Grizz grunted. "Try to pull some strings. Found out his strings don't reach out here. Found out some of the people he called are friends of the club. Funny how that works." A dark humor laced his words. "His world got real small, real fast. He'll be gone by sunrise. And the evidence from his phone has been sent to a few interested parties. A lawyer we keep on retainer for situations. It'll be handled by the book or otherwise." Rook nodded, his eyes still fixed on the fire. The flames danced and flickered, and in them, he saw his sister Sarah's face. He remembered the last time he'd seen her, at a family barbecue. She'd been wearing a turtleneck in the middle of July. He'd been young, stupid, wrapped up in his own world of bikes and bar fights. He'd noticed the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when her husband came near, but he hadn't understood. He'd told himself it was none of his business. A week later, she was dead. The official report said she fell down the stairs. Rook knew better. Her husband walked away, a pillar of the community, grieving his clumsy, tragic wife. That failure had forged Rook into the man he was today. It had taken the wild, reckless energy of his youth and hammered it into a weapon, a shield for those who had none. Every soul they saved, every monster they put in its place, was a penance. It was for Sarah. She reminds you of her, doesn't she? Grizz's voice was soft, cutting through Rook's reverie. He was the only one who knew the full story, the only one who had been there to pick up the pieces of a shattered young man and help forge him into a leader. Rook didn't answer for a long moment. He just stared into the fire. The eyes, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. She had the same damn eyes, like a bird with a broken wing, terrified to even try to fly, but you could see it still wants to. He took another drink of his beer. We can't fix what's broken in her. All we can do is give her a safe place to land and let her heal her own wings. Back in the small room, Isla emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy towel. The clothes Sadie had left were soft, worn sweatpants, and a thick hooded sweatshirt. Putting them on felt like putting on a suit of armor. She felt safe. Tentatively, she opened the door. The clubhouse was quieter now. Most of the bikers had dispersed, leaving only Rook, Grizz, and Sadie sitting at a large wooden table. A bowl of steaming chicken soup sat at an empty place setting. It looked like the most delicious meal she had ever seen. Sadie smiled warmly. Feeling better, honey? Come eat something. You need your strength. Isla sat down, her movements still cautious. She picked up the spoon, her hand trembling slightly. For years, Corbin had controlled her food, her weight, what she was allowed to eat and when. This simple act of eating a bowl of soup felt like a revolution. She took a spoonful. It was hot, savory, and filled with a nourishment that went far beyond the physical. It was a taste of kindness, of care. She ate the whole bowl in silence, the three figures at the table giving her the space she needed, their quiet presence a comforting blanket. When she was finished, Rook finally spoke. Isla, he said, his voice gentle but direct. What happens next is up to you. We have the evidence from his phone. We can give it to the police. A friend of ours, a lawyer who specializes in this, can represent you. We can make sure he pays for what he did. Legally, he paused, letting the words sink in. Or, if you want to disappear, we can make that happen too. We have contacts all over the country. We can set you up with a new name, a new life, somewhere he'll never think to look. The club will finance it. No one will ever know. He leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. Either way, we will watch over you. He will never, ever touch you again. That is the oath of this entire chapter. You have our word. Isla looked at the three of them. The fierce, haunted president. The mountain-like, loyal brother. The wise, matriarchal den mother. They were a strange and terrifying family of guardian angels, clad in leather and ink. They offered her two paths, justice or freedom. Under Corbin's rule, she'd had no choices at all. The sheer possibility of being in control of her own destiny was dizzying. She thought about the years of silent suffering, of the person she had become, a ghost in her own life. Going to the police meant facing him again in a courtroom. It meant reliving the trauma, but it also meant he would be held accountable, that his name would be known for what he was, not the charming philanthropist he pretended to be. Disappearing was tempting, a clean slate, but she realized with a startling clarity that she was done with running. She had run from her hiding place tonight, and these men had caught her. Now, she didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to stand and fight. She took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath she'd taken in a decade. I want him to pay, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I want everyone to know who he is. I want to use the evidence. I want to face him. A look of profound respect dawned on Rook's face. He had offered her the easy way out, and she had chosen the path of the warrior. All right, he said with a decisive nod. Then that's what we'll do. Sadie will stay with you here for as long as you need. Tomorrow, we'll meet the lawyer. We'll be with you every step of the way. You won't be alone. Over the next few weeks, the clubhouse became Isla's sanctuary and her war room. Sadie became her confidant, listening to her stories, holding her when she cried, and teaching her how to reclaim her own strength. The bikers were a constant, silent presence. They treated her not as a fragile victim, but as a respected survivor. They taught her how to work on the bikes, the smell of grease and oil becoming a scent of empowerment. Grizz showed her how to throw a punch, not with anger, but with focus and control, teaching her that her body was her own, a source of strength, not a target for violence. Rook would sit with her by the fire some nights, sharing stories of the road, of brotherhood, of loss and redemption. He never spoke directly of his sister, but Isla saw Sarah in the shadows of his stories, and she understood that in helping her, he was healing a part of himself. The legal battle was brutal, just as Rook had warned. Corbin's high-priced lawyers tried to paint her as unstable, vindictive, a liar. But they hadn't counted on the mountain of evidence from his own phone, nor had they counted on the silent, leather-clad phalanx of Hell's angels who filled the back 2 rows of the courtroom every single day. Their presence was a quiet, unyielding statement. She is one of us. She is protected. It unnerved Corbin, rattled his lawyers, and gave Isla a strength she never knew she possessed. When she took the stand, she looked directly at him, not with fear, but with a cold, clear certainty. She spoke her truth, her voice never wavering. She was no longer his victim. She was his accuser, and she was not alone. The verdict came back, guilty on all counts. As they led a stunned, ashen-faced Corbin away in handcuffs, Isla didn't feel elation, but a profound, quiet peace. It was over. The cage was not just open, it was dismantled, melted down, and gone forever. Outside the courthouse, as reporters swarmed, the bikers formed a human wall around her, shielding her from the cameras, and escorted her away. Back at the clubhouse that night, there was a celebration. Not a wild party, but a gathering of family. They barbecued, told stories, and laughed. Isla, wearing jeans and one of the club support shirts, laughed with them, a real, deep-belly laugh that felt foreign and wonderful. Later, she stood with Rook on the porch, looking up at the star-dusted sky. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Rook looked at her, and for the first time, his gray eyes were completely clear of storms. The ghost had been quieted. "You don't have to," he said. "You did the hard part. You survived. You fought back. All we did was open the door. You were the one who had the courage to run through it." He looked out at the road, at the endless ribbon of asphalt that represented his life. Sometimes, the angels you're looking for don't have halos and harps. Sometimes they have leather and chrome. You just have to be brave enough to accept the ride. Isla knew her journey was far from over. The scars, both visible and invisible, would take time to fade. But she was no longer a broken survivor cowering behind a freezer. She was a warrior, forged in fear and freed by the unlikeliest of saviors. She had found a new road, a new family, and a new life, all because one night, in a lonely gas station, a group of outlaws decided to uphold their own sacred code. The world is full of monsters hiding in plain sight, but it's also full of heroes, and sometimes they ride Harleys. If you believe in the power of brotherhood to stand against evil, and if you stand with survivors, share this story. Let the world know that even in the darkest of nights, help can come from the most unexpected places, with the roar of an engine and the heart of a lion.